1945. Across Europe, the guns had fallen silent. While cities erupted in victory celebrations, people were breathing freely for the first time in years. Newspapers promised war criminals would soon face justice. The world believed one thing: the Nazis are defeated. Justice will follow. But on the other side of the Atlantic, something very different was already underway. Inside American military archives, documents were being moved. Folders were marked with red paper clips, symbols of special review. These files carried the names of scientists, but never the details of their past crimes. The clerks received only one instruction: don't look at where they've been, look at how useful they are. And so, a silent list began to form. On it were engineers, doctors, chemists, men who wore Nazi uniforms. There were no interrogations, no arrests. They were not being captured. They were being saved. While the world waited for criminals to stand trial, some were quietly being transferred to the United States. Why? At the time, that answer was shared only among a small circle of military officials. They used a single word: the Cold War. The war had just ended, but a new one had already begun. A war of technology. The United States and the Soviet Union raced to secure the mines Hitler had left behind. Whoever gathered these brilliant scientists would build the rockets that pierced the sky, fly the fastest jets, and one day reach space itself. Officially, the public was told, justice is being served. In reality, some files were no longer heading to courtrooms. They were being slipped into airline envelopes. New identities were prepared. Records were rewritten. Photographs were replaced. A hidden operation had begun, one the world barely noticed. Operation Paperclip. But where this operation would ultimately lead was darker than anyone could have imagined. Because one of those selected individuals would change the fate of humanity forever, and become the greatest moral contradiction in modern history. As the list grew longer, one name kept rising to the very top: Wernher von Braun. Military intelligence reports described him with a single sentence: a true genius, born on the wrong side. Von Braun's past was far from ordinary. He was the architect of Hitler's most feared weapon, the V-2 rockets. As these missiles rained down on London, they left civilians with one overwhelming feeling: helplessness. Yet one crucial detail remained hidden from the world. The underground factories where the rockets were built were also extensions of concentration camps. Prisoners, starving and injured, were forced to work to death. Many never survived long enough to see a completed rocket reach the launch ramp. Von Braun looked away. When American operatives arrived, they did not place him in a courtroom. They seated him in a private aircraft. His past was erased. Photographs altered. Lines disappeared from his records one by one. He was no longer a suspect. He was now a candidate for American citizenship. Soon after, he was placed in charge of the United States rocket program. When introduced to the public, there was only one label attached to his name: a scientist serving freedom. Nowhere were these words mentioned. Black small square his Nazi past. Black small square the truth of the camps. Black small square his awareness of the deaths. All of it remained hidden behind a closed file folder. But the story was only beginning. Because this was no longer just the tale of one man. It was the story of a dark bargain that would test the conscience of an entire nation. As the shadow of the Cold War stretched across the world, decision-making tables in Washington quickly filled. While the Soviet Union's progress in nuclear weapons was alarming enough, the true fear came from the space race itself. Each rocket test sent a new wave of panic through the American capital. In Defense Department reports, one sentence appeared again and again, written in red ink: if technological dominance is lost, global leadership is lost. That fear expanded the boundaries of Operation Paperclip. This was no longer about saving a handful of scientists. It became a mission to bring every valuable mind left in Germany to the United States, no matter their past. Behind closed doors in Washington, one phrase echoed: we're not interested in Nazis. We're interested in projects. While courtrooms were meant to debate war crimes, Pentagon conference rooms debated rocket speeds. Who had served at which camp? How many prisoners had died because of their work? Those questions were now off the record. Only one thing mattered. Can this man build a space rocket? The deaths of thousands, whether witnessed or enabled by these men, had become a secondary detail in government calculations. Von Braun's ascent accelerated within this exact equation. Even when early test launches failed, he was protected. The press never heard of it. Mistakes were buried. Failure reports vanished. Even financial records were manipulated. Because to the United States, von Braun was indispensable. In the notes of one project supervisor, a single line was written. This man must be taken, along with his past. Which meant America hadn't just purchased scientists. It had purchased their dark burden as well. On television, von Braun smiled while explaining stars to children. Behind the scenes, the hidden documents on forced labor camps decayed in locked archives, truths no one wanted to confront. As the space program advanced, public excitement soared. Every rocket launch sent a new wave of national pride across the country. And as the rockets rose higher, the past was buried deeper. No one dared ask the question. How many graves lie beneath the feet of the man who carried us to the stars? But as long as that question remained unspoken, the story would stay incomplete. And the truth, sooner or later, would come knocking. Von Braun and the other scientists brought over with him were now embedded inside America's most secret programs. They were placed in isolated desert bases and restricted testing facilities sealed off from the press. When journalists arrived, the cameras were allowed to capture only a single image. Rocket engineers smiling in front of the American flag. But the cameras never turned the corner. What stayed hidden was the past. Men who should have stood trial in courtrooms were now applauded in conference halls. The American media introduced them as scientific heroes of freedom. Yet behind that glowing image lay a chilling silence. Concentration camp records were sealed. The names of the forced laborers were hidden. Even the burial sites of the dead workers were unknown. All of it was deliberately ignored. Because the leadership focused on a single fear. If the Soviets reach space first, we lose global leadership. And fear always outweighs justice. Many institutions, including NASA, were fully aware of the Paperclip scientists' histories, yet not a single word was mentioned in official records. Their Nazi affiliations were labeled as forced membership or erased entirely. Their pasts were cleansed by the state. Von Braun had become a beloved public science figure. He appeared on television, explaining the wonders of space to children. Yet in his past were camps where children themselves were forced to work. But no one asked about it. And when someone tried, the answer was always ready. Everyone was just following orders back then. That excuse became the single sentence used to cover thousands of deaths. The Apollo program accelerated. With every launch, crowds across America roared, "USA! USA!" And no one stopped to wonder. Who was really sitting at that rocket design desk? Summer of 1969. Television screens around the world replayed the same image. Man has landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong's voice moves millions to tears. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Yet there was a truth the cameras could not show. Behind that historic step stood files that had been deliberately sealed shut. After the moon victory, some historians and investigative journalists began digging into classified archives. Documents started to leak. Old military reports resurfaced. And then, what many feared became reality. Operation Paperclip was exposed. Headlines exploded. The US protected Nazi scientists. The public was stunned. The men they once hailed as heroes carried dark pasts. Official statements were late to come. But eventually, the US government acknowledged the program. Yes. Nazi connections had been erased. Yes. Certain war crimes had been overlooked. Yes. Silence had been deliberate. And at the end of the statement stood just one phrase: for reasons of national security. The world realized something painful. Humanity had reached the moon. But conscience had stood still on Earth. Wernher von Braun was never put on trial. He received honors and awards. On his grave, the words read, "Space Pioneer." Nowhere did it say, "Silent partner of the concentration camps." As one historian once wrote, "History is often a tale written by the victors. But behind some victories lie unheard screams." So the final question remains. When humanity reached the moon, did it leave justice behind on Earth? Follow for more. Subscribe for the truth.